So the main point where we started was what is important: air, water, trees, the soil. It was kind of what led to this. I say we because I started out initially with Pavneet, but she dropped out because she got sick and ran out of time. So we started by putting in the term porosity and proportions, because somehow that at that point, it was just after the monsoon, it felt very important to us, the porosity of the soil, which lets the water percolate, and it's very obvious in certain parts of Oroville how it's different. And then taking that further, Islan had this nice picture of the healthy soil, which is permeable, and the unhealthy soil, which is again relates. So I just stole that image from there, borrowed it, sorry. And so exploring this further, it leads to the porosity also of cities, of the streets, of the buildings. So I just explored all this further, and there's some recap and some not recap. So then looking at the wind, how do buildings affect the wind flow? So these are just studies, and this one is orientated with an easterly wind, but we have actually more southerly wind, southeast, south. But the principles stay the same. It's leaving space for the wind, orientating vegetation to shade the buildings, to ensure that the wind is able to pass. And we have the advantage that it works very well here because we have the southerly wind, and we want to shade always on the north, on the west and the east side, in order to allow for the low sun, the trees to shade the buildings from the low sun in the morning and in the afternoon, because the south and the north facades we can shade with overhangs. So then going back into the porosity and what happens in urban environments when the more build-up there is, more impervious surfaces, it increases the runoff, and it reduces the capacity for the ground for the water to percolate into the ground. So it's something what we have to, while we develop the city, we have to take into consideration that we have this water and we have the climatic situation of having this very short stretch of the monsoon where we have a lot of water. So we always have to keep that very much in the forefront of our minds when planning anything, and reduce or minimize the impervious surfaces. And that also, I mean, again, the porousness translates also to buildings in general. So I try to take a little bit of a bigger building. So just letting in the light, the daylight, making sure that the wind can flow through, allow for vegetation in the buildings. I'll come back to that later. And then, of course, also being able to look through the buildings so that it reduces the massiveness of things. So looking at proportions and scales in urban design and buildings in general, this is just an image. It's been done since hundreds and thousands of years. I mean, humans have looked at these things and thought about them. And it's something we just sometimes, I mean, we have to make sure we take care of that. So then back to the slide which I had last time, is just the familiar streetscapes of the proportions of what we know in Pondicherry. So just looking at that and giving it some scale so that we can understand the different proportions of residential streets, mixed use, the shared mobility in the narrow street, which is a wide road, but it lacks shade, although it is used, but everybody's always trying to find that little piece of shade, which is usually used up by vendors. And the beauty of public spaces which are integrated into the urban fabric, which is something we really have to look into also here. And then the problem of if there is no shade, the spaces become very reduced in their capacity to be able to use them. So then they're only used in the evenings. And then looking at, again, Pondicherry planned and unplanned or semi-planned green infrastructure. Beautiful trees, but they're not given the space they need, which leads to all kinds of problems in infrastructure and in the buildings and in the roads. A slightly better option where they've started planning, but you can see that when these trees grow to this side, the situation will not be that much better. This is a slightly better situation. Then another problem is as we develop the city, something Islan mentioned also is the heat island effect. Something very important to keep in mind, because we have, well, I guess it comes back, the more buildings, the more heat gets absorbed in the buildings, which radiate out, and vegetation can help a lot in reducing that shading the surfaces of the buildings so that they don't heat up. Yeah, here again we have just a list of important things to consider with, again, the runoff, the difference between, of course, the two. Then going a bit more specifically, getting more into this actual site situation, so allowing always for the wind to pass through the site so that the houses have natural ventilation as much as possible, which can very much avoid air conditioners, which again lead to more global warming, and the importance of having vegetation in and around buildings. So it's great for thermal comfort, air quality. It absorbs noise, so if you have trees and plants close to the building, you have the noise from your neighbors gets distorted and absorbed. And of course the biophilia, which is humans are better off in green places. And just some simple consideration, what I already mentioned is the ensuring the shading of your facades on the south and in the north, because we are close to the equator. We're just 12 degrees north of the equator, so the sun actually goes to the north from May to August. So we also need to have overhangs on the northern side. I figured out that the northeast monsoon comes from the northeast, and no matter how big your overhang is, you're never going to be able to keep the water from coming onto your terrace. So there's no point trying, but at least you shade from the sun, make sure your facades don't get any sun during the day. And the south it's more easy because the sun is generally high in the summer in the south, and as in the winter when it's low, you actually want it to come in. So then it's nice to have a bit of sun on your terraces sometimes. And then again, the importance and the advantages of having trees, which reduce the general temperature of surrounding area. Then I wanted to go look into building materials, because last time I had mentioned that concrete is not the way forward for everything. Of course, we can't avoid it totally, but so there's so much available. I mean, we have our homegrown poured earth and rammed earth and the compressed earth blocks. The ancient techniques of lime plaster, of lime, building with lime in general, I've tried to explore that a bit. I asked Satprem, and he said, he confirmed that it doesn't work with steel, so we can't use it as concrete. But looking just on the internet, I found that nowadays we have fiberglass reinforcement bars, so it's actually an option. And there's also graphite, but I think that's a bit expensive. But we don't know what the future holds, so we'll see as we go along. But it's really just that I think it's really something, if we want to be all we claim that we want to be, we really have to take these things seriously of reducing our carbon footprints and going down that road of maybe sometimes having the more difficult building material to work with, more maintenance, but in the long run, it's actually better. And lime plaster and lime building works really well. I mean, it makes a significant difference in the temperature in the buildings and the general climate. So just looking at some of the homegrown things we have, wattle and daub, That's Fabian's house, by the way. We have poured earth, concrete, and jack arches used also in the Santé building. And then I discovered, I've used these woody blocks, which are also great because they're clay, very little material comparatively, and good insulation because they're hollow. And then I discovered that in India nowadays you get pre-tensioned concrete, precast slabs or whatever. Anyway, so that's again, if you have to use concrete, and it's a reduction of material and it's fast installation. So it's something to look at also. And then looking, again, here's some homegrown examples of which just for the building material and the form, the deep windows, poured earth with cement flooring. It's a concrete frame structure, but it minimizes the concrete, and this roof is all woody blocks. This is an Orville. This is an Orville. This is also an Orville. This one, yes, and this is somewhere else. But I just wanted to show that also large buildings are actually being made with rammed earth and poured earth. So it's not like we only have 1 or 2 story buildings. We have to see how that goes further. I'm sure other people know much more about this, but then I had this the infiltration map, which is very old, and I looked for a percolation map, but couldn't find anything. And anyway, the two are very much sort of the same. But what this just shows is that the areas with the high percolation of infiltration also is where somehow the forests have developed mostly. And then, again, this is a courtesy of, I think, Isla. Just a very nice schematic picture of the runoff we have in Orville. So the ridge, and then it goes to the east and the west, and a little bit to the north. And from here, the Ore Dam goes also to the northwest. So here is just to show where then that is in relation to the forests we have. And then I jump to mobility, which I did in collaboration, or mostly just borrowed from Fabian and Hendrik and incorporated. So it's just showing where what is. Basically, this has all been discussed. But leads me to the next topic of infrastructure, saying where there's the parks and only pedestrians and cyclists, and for now, also less need in most cases of infrastructure. So I came up with this very schematic little plan for the infrastructure, and to have precast conduits in the places where we will in the near future need more infrastructure to come in. So all these places, the residential zone up to Solar Kitchen, and then this is the centerfield stretch where for now there's the high tension cable, and the OFC is probably in as well. So we don't actually need to do anything there, but to definitely plan for a conduit, because it will be the most dense residential area, so we will have to have conduits on both sides. And then this is the international zone area. This is not entirely correct. Anyway, so we have a conduit there with the possibility to have more conduit. And through Darkali, we just have a flexible pipe which goes in, and which all the cables and conduits cables and pipes can go through. I'll show you. And then the same goes for the Bliss and this stretch. Here we already have the high tension cable, but there's no buildings planned here, so nothing needs to be connected. So it can just go from junction box to junction box. And then from the junction boxes, again, it can pan out. So this is just showing it more in context. And yeah, so these are the precast conduits. It can be all very neatly laid in. And these are these humongous junction boxes. Of course, I've now learned that the infrastructure, it's too early to decide on what the infrastructure will be, but that will be decided by the experts when things are more clear. And these would be these flexible pipes which can go through the parks and the forests, and then just into the junction boxes, and from there they can either go into a conduit or be connected. So these are actually examples from the presentation we saw just before lunch from the experts from Ahmedabad. And this is Auzolan's Eric's proposal. He just made a very quick kind of proposal of what would be possible, homegrown, produced here. So I think that's actually a really good kind of option. And like I said before, it's a huge expense now, but everybody has confirmed that in the future and in the long run, it's going to save a lot of money because it's going to eliminate this perpetual digging up and breaking of pipes and cables and all this kind of stuff, because you'll always be able to just lift up the lids or go into the junction box, connect new things, I'll fix things. So something really to, just some options of nice, neat things. And my little sketch of the conduits which could follow the contour of the ground and be used as cycle and pedestrian walkways. They could be above ground where it's necessary for the water to flow under, or in the ground, the water can flow over, they could be sealed. And this is just a very simple sketch of the idea of having the conduit also always on the same radius on the outer side of the road, and then with having junction boxes. It goes under the road, and you have a junction box, and from there, again, you connect out. So these would be these junction boxes, and then here it would be a flexible conduit, and on that side, it would be a precast conduit. This is from last time. I haven't done anything further on this. This is the intersection of the international zone with the Darkali forest. So I wanted to open up the southern side of the Darkali forest for more activities, because it's such a beautiful place, and it would be nice to be able to share it with more people. So just to have a very simple sort of activities happening there. It doesn't have to be anything specific. It could just be yoga. It could be a little whatever get together with kids, art installations, and so it's just to make the Darkali Park accessible to more people while still keeping the inner part of it as the very closed, not closed, but very sort of quiet sanctuary type of wild place for the wildlife. And this line of force has been discussed many times, and while I was looking at the lines of force, I realized that it's on the canyon. And then last time Neha and Ganesh presented this idea with the water. So that sort of fit in so beautifully, and I had this idea to just plant it really dense forest of TDEF so that it has its own power and it has its own force, so it becomes like a force of nature, what Ganesh and Neha was saying. And we have this other line of force, which is half on the canyon. So consequently, I thought, okay, then half of it would be planted, and the other half would be very light sort of structures. So then going to the other side, this is again, I haven't done any further work on it. It's just a place, it's the northern side of Darkali. It's between the industrial zone and the Darkali. So it's more a place for me for little markets, expose people to present their products, have little markets, lunch places, eateries. People can go there for coffee, lunch break, enjoy the forest in that area, and the water bodies. So then, by chance, I had a very brief kind of encounter with the lines of force, but I couldn't come up with anything which I thought did justice to whatever. But then I found these studies of Roger Auger, which actually very much tie into kind of the ideas I have of these open spaces, permeable, porous, and off the ground so that the ground coverage is minimum. So these are a compression of the slides I had last time. It's about the industrial zone, which is also the soil typology is not so permeable. So it's good to have buildings which are raised off the ground so that you allow for more ground to be for the water to percolate rather than having too many closed spaces. And then again, bringing lots of nature in. And keeping buildings very open and cross-ventilation, wind, shade, nature. Going into the street width, so looking into that further because there was an interesting comment I got. It was that the road actually just needs to be as wide as an emergency vehicle, so 3 meters. This is supposed to be 3 meters. Is sufficient, and it turns out that it's also the most comfortable and the most safe if you give priority to cyclists and you keep this cars as guests on the road. And so I just did a little study of some sections. These are the sections I had before already. The plaza, where the Crown crosses the forest, all is needed is actually the infrastructure, which and where it crosses the park, you can have a cycle path and a pedestrian, and you keep the infrastructure in the same position. And then you have the different sections throughout the Crown, which would be from very narrow, and then just the different experiences, but always making sure that there's sufficient shade. And just for, I think what makes sense is to keep the infrastructure always in the exact same position, but everything else can meander around that. In this case, I haven't gone to the other side, but it just speaks for itself, I think. And then I wanted to go into much more detail, but I got as far as looking at this corner of the humanscapes and Kalpana. They're fuzzy because it was foggy in the early morning. And how to really, with very simple methods, actually create little spaces and public spaces which are at least semi-shaded. So I came across all these fantastic bamboo structures. So I thought, okay, that's something which can happen actually at relatively short notice. And it's also just creating spaces which have no need for any kind of monetary transaction. You can even come there, you just meet up there with friends and sit and relax. And so this, again, just a compression of what I had last time. The different aspects of what could all happen on this stretch of Crown, which I wanted to look at in more detail. Different areas. Don't think I need to go into that much more. Again, just informal seating areas, some areas where people can exercise in the park maybe. And then moving on from the solar kitchen, having that stretch in center field between the center guest house and solar kitchen could become like a pedestrian cyclist thing with lots of green. And then I wanted to look at the solar kitchen again, so I went into a little bit more detail. And the idea was, this is the edge of the line of force. So I just looked at what would the movements be. This is the solar kitchen PTTC. Where do people come from? Where do they go? And then create shade with trees and temporary shading structures until the trees are big along the edges, where we could have eateries and whatever, and then the center keep an open space, which could be like a sort of a step well for activities. So just some impressions. Looking into the future, I found this image and I really liked it. But then I got into a problem at home because they said, oh, but we need solar panels on all the roofs. So we'll have to figure that one out. But I just thought if we could do something like that, I think that would be quite nice. And I just wanted to emphasize is to maximize the minimum and plan to allow for the future to be planned and build only for now. We don't know what wonders the future holds. Thank you.